we could release this and people aren't going to be like, this sounds bad or this sounds DIY, hopefully, right? Like that's really a goal. We don't want it to sound DIY. We don't want people to think about it. Good enough means that the people hear the song and they hear the song, not that it was self-recorded.
This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band Podcast. I am your host, Benedict Hein, and I'm here with my friend and co-host, Malcolm Owen Flood. How are you, buddy?
I'm great, man. Thank you for asking. I had the pleasure of turning on the radio and hearing a song I mixed yesterday right as I got home. So I was like, yes, it's like the best way to end a weekend.
Awesome. Congrats. Was it the Wet Future song?
It was. Yeah. I guess we mentioned that last week, didn't we?
Yeah.
Super stoked how that's going.
Cool to hear an update on that. So they're playing it, and did they get feedback from listeners or anything?
Else? I haven't checked in. I guess I should do that. That's a good idea. But I liked it.
Yeah, that's super awesome. I saw after you told me about it. I saw their post, I think, because you shared it, or I don't know, but I somehow came across their social and saw their post about it, and I'm so happy for them, especially knowing that they've worked with you and record stuff on their own, and I think, is Lucas one of the members?
Yep.
Yeah, because I think he even wrote a message at some point, or I was in contact with him because he listens to the podcast and stuff. So it was just nice to see that all work out.
Right. And connection you might not even be aware, but you might be aware of is that he's in Shepherd, which you've worked with as well. And we both worked with, yeah.
Yeah, that's the full circle here.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I didn't know exactly where I came across his name, but yeah, awesome.
There it is, yeah. And now I got him into the self-recording band community as well, I think. So
I saw that.
Lucas, you're part of the team now. You're stuck.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. Yeah, the Shepherd guys, shout out to them as well. This is also a fun one because they've worked with you and then they work with me and they listen to the podcast. They record stuff on their own. I think they improved their recordings a lot with our help. I think we can say that. And it's just so awesome to see how that stuff works and people getting great results. And now something being played on the radio, super exciting.
Definitely. Yeah, it's totally great. I've got a little tidbit from that song on the radio to tie into this episode, but maybe I think it's going to be in a part 2 section. So,
okay, now I'm curious, but yeah, okay, cool. Can't wait for that. Yeah, we're doing a 2-part series this time, or like not series, a 2-part episode. Because
how do you say series?
Series?
Okay, yeah.
I think I said serious.
Yeah, I think you did.
No, series. Yeah, no, series.
There's a surprisingly small number of things like that, considering that this is not your first language. So good job, man. I still think I screw up more words than you. So
thank you so much. I mean, I can't stand my German accent when I listen back to my podcasts or videos and stuff, but I think I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah, you're doing great. Doing great.
Thank you. So 2-part episode this time again, because it's a pretty long list of stuff we have to cover as we talk about, what do we talk about? We talk about minimum requirements. So what we mean is the minimum stuff you need to make sure you have when it comes to tracks you record, minimum requirements when it comes to your performance or technical things you need to do. So all the boxes you absolutely need to check if you want to make a decent sounding record and maybe work with a pro mixer. So these are the things we as mixers ask for if someone wants us to give them a great sounding end result. Basically, these things have to be taken care of.
Yeah. So where the idea for this episode came was bands have been recording themselves and then sending their tracks to Benny and I for mixing. And for some of these guys, in particular, this fellow Chase Spencer I'm working with right now, he has cut an album with me, a more high budget album in the studio with me in the past. So now he's trying to do a DIY thing. And his big question is is this going to be are these tracks are they good enough? And I was able to look at them and say, yes, these are good enough. And then he was like, what does good enough mean? Like, is it awesome or is it just good enough? And I'm like, it's good enough, man. And good enough isn't bad. I think a lot of people always want to strive for perfection, but there is a certain bit of reality that has to come and smack you that you're probably not able to do as good of a job as a professional engineer with decades of experience in a world-class recording studio. It's probably not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
So you have to aim for good enough. And, good enough might be the best you're able to get no matter what in the environment and gear and just situation you're in and with experience and stuff. So good enough can mean different things. But for me, when I'm hearing good enough, I mean, like, we could release this and people aren't going to be like, this sounds bad or this sounds DIY, hopefully, right? Like, that's really a goal. We don't want it to sound DIY. We don't want people to think about it. So good enough means that the people hear the song and they hear the song, not that it was self-recorded. And in theory, that means it could go on the radio or something, but it should sound like a professional release. Would there be a difference if you had the big budget? Probably. But unless you actually had that, you don't know what that looks like. So if you hit this good enough mark, this like floating little bar, you have to be this high to ride. If you hit that and there's no other like context for what this, $10,000 version of that song would have looked like, it's good enough and people are going to love it no matter what. Right.
Yeah.
So it's all about hitting that level of quality. And there definitely is a certain level. If you don't hit that, then it starts to sound more DIY and like, we're a DIY recording podcast, but we want it to sound really good.
Yes. There's also this thing where I think a couple of years back, I would have mixed like everything that someone would send me because I just needed gigs and like, I just didn't think about it too much. I was like, the Billy Decker thing, have audio, will mix. I was like pretty much like that, But
that's amazing.
As we as mixers move on with our careers and like get better, there comes a point where we need to think about what we actually want to work with, because if someone sends us stuff and even after we've mixed and mastered it still sounds clearly DIY or like a demo or not professional, our name is going to be on that. And it's like, there's this point where we also have to decide if it's if we want to be on that record, and B, if it's fair to sell our services to a person knowing that they're not going to get a really, really great result. So I have this all the time, basically, where people hit me up and they sent me their demos or their raw recordings. And I'm like, I could take that and they would probably pay, but I would sell them a product that is not going to be really good and it will cost them a lot of money. So it's probably in their best interest to just keep practicing and not doing it at this point, or trying it themselves. And I don't know, but it's like not everything is ready to be mixed, and it's worth paying a lot of money for. And it's our job also to be just honest, I think, then, and say to people that, man, it's like wait a couple of weeks or a couple of months or a year or I don't know, and then come back, or try to do it yourself this time. And like, it's tough sometimes, but it's just the reality. And if you don't want to run into that, if you don't want to have a mixer say that to you, you should pay attention and do the things we tell you now in this episode. That's basically it. And you're totally right. There is this threshold when it starts like to be worth paying for, worth putting in the effort, because then you can also expect the result you were hoping for. If you're below that threshold, you can only hope, and sometimes it will end up costing you a lot of money and effort and time, and you're still not going to get anywhere with that recording.
Because if you do send tracks that aren't good enough to a mixer like either of us, it will come back insanely better, but it will never be good enough. It won't hit that level, right? So, and of course, it's important to think as the band, as the producer, if you're recording yourself, somebody in the band's the producer, as we have an episode on, what is good enough to you guys as well, right? You have to find that kind of like line of like what you're aiming for, and have a realistic expectation, I think, as well, because maybe your good enough is only that like top 1% of all recording quality, and like maybe there's a wake up call. You're not going to hit it without some serious cash flow.
That's what it basically comes down to, is like your expectations have to match your recordings and the effort you put into it and stuff like that. So good enough is like it's not a fixed thing. It's like, it depends on the project and your goals and everything. But what I meant is like, I always want to make sure I can give the person what they were hoping to get, and like I can help them achieve what they were hoping to achieve. And if I already know that I'm not going to be able to do that with the source material, I need to tell them. If they're like, we know this is not good, not really good, but we want it that way and we only do it for our self-actualization, I mean, okay, we can talk. I'm down to do it, but if it sounds like that, but you want to be on the radio, we have a problem. Right. So yeah, that's the thing. It just has to match. And like sometimes you have to convince people that what they're doing is actually good enough already. That also happens, like with the example that you said, when someone who's used to work professionally on their songs, now they want to do it themselves and they just don't know where the bar is actually. Mm-hmm. Or when someone who's just really talented, really good, who's been practicing for years, but they've never gotten like outside feedback and they just don't know where they're at. I had this morning. I had a coaching call with a person who is doing children's songs, actually, like rock songs or ska. So it was like ska punk, rock songs for children. Right. And he's doing for like some stuff for German television and YouTube and stuff. And he booked a coaching with me, and it was pretty awesome what he did already. It sounded pretty cool. There were some minor things that I tried to help him with, but it was pretty good actually. But he was unsure about that, I guess, because he's heard it so many times and he was not objective anymore. And like sometimes in that situation, you need some guidance, maybe where good enough actually is, what that actually means if you've checked all the boxes. And then if you send it off for mixing, you can rest assured that it will work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, really, we're talking about, for good enough for this episode, it's that, again, going back to people are going to hear it and they're going to hear the song and think it's awesome, right? Like that's really what we're going for. So good enough is going to mean that there's nothing in the recording that is drawing attention to the recording, I guess. So that, I think that's kind of the context for the rest of these episodes, is like, keep that in mind, because we're trying to tell you the minimum requirements, and we're basing our examples on kind of common situations. So, like limited channels and limited gear and undesirable rooms, and it's totally possible. So yeah, I think we should probably jump into drums.
Absolutely. So I just want to add one more thing before we start, and that is we are focusing on the technical things, like things related to sound and like the gear you're using and how you're using it, and like performance, like stuff that happens in the recording process. And we're not like addressing production, arrangement, and writing as much, because that would be absolutely, like, we could do a series with 10 episodes probably if we would include that. Because that is, I think, the most common problems are not actually in the recording, but before that. It's in the pre-production, the writing, the arranging, that stuff. Mm-hmm. But we're not covering that right now. We just assume you've done your homework. We assume you've done pre-production. We assume you've written good songs that you're happy with. The arrangement is there. And now it comes time to track it. Like, that's what we assume for these episodes.
Absolutely. And these are all really common things that both of us encounter every day from mixing tracks that get sent to us. So these are like really like the things we want to drive home, because if we do this and they get fixed before they reach us, like it's gonna, like, these will be awesome. That's all we need.
Yeah.
Cool. But yeah, like really speaking from experience on all of these points.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So the drum situation we're kind of sticking with, at least for most of this, is 8 channels, which is kind of a common, because that's like, that's as big as an interface comes usually, I think, right? There's like 8 preamps on it. So if you have that, you can do drums. We're going to touch on 4 channels, I think, probably. But 8 channels, you can record drums. So that's kind of the situation right now. And if you have a 2-channel interface, I would say don't record drums.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Some people have these digital desks these days with like 16 or more inputs. Now, if you have that and can use it as an interface, awesome. You can do.
Yep.
You can record great drums, but like with 8 channels, you're good. That's the minimum requirement to record real drums, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, and if you're one of those people without, your options are program drums or go to a studio for drums. like rent a real space and get it done there. But there's still going to be, even if that's your plan, lots of valuable stuff to still make sure happens is coming. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
So you got 8 channels. I think the first thing is, what do you mic? Like what gets priority with those 8 channels? You have to choose how to spend those 8 credits.
Yes. So you could, I'm wondering, because you put here, consider recording just cymbals. I want to address that first, because you could also like go really like in depth and into all the details with the cymbals. If you have using a lot of cymbals, you could mic the hi-hat, the ride, the crashes, a china, a splash, whatever you have. You could close mic all of these and put a pair of overheads up and use your inputs that way, and then program the shells. That could be an option.
Or record the shells and then remove all the mics for the cymbals, right? Like that's outside of the box ideas there.
Yes.
I don't know if we should really get into that because it's such a technical, like how would you do that kind of thing, even just running the DAW.
Yeah.
But I thought it was worth mentioning. That's why I wrote down.
Yeah, totally. And I wanted to just bring it up because I think if you're going to program drums, realistic sounding cymbals are often the most problematic thing to do for people, or the hardest thing to do. So recording cymbals and programming the rest can often be a solution here. But let's say you want to record real drums with 8 channels. I'd prioritize, and if cymbals are not the priority, if you want to record everything, I'd prioritize definitely kick and snare. So I always want to have one kick mic, and that's probably a kick in mic because it's the most defined. Like you want to have the attack, and you want to have a clear trigger also if you want to use samples later. So a kick out might sound great, but it's going to be harder to use as a trigger. It's going to be less defined. It's going to have more bleed. So a mic inside the kick, definitely. And then another mic on top of the snare. Yeah. So those 2 are the most important. Then, okay, cool. Then I'd say a pair of overheads is the next priority, just as an image of the whole kit. And also cymbal mics, but not only that, but also like the image of the whole thing. Yeah,
so now that's, a pair. So we're at 4 channels used, so we got half of them left still.
Yeah, and then I'd say I'd agree with you here that I'd do toms. If you have 2, let's assume you have a set with 2 toms, I'd mic those. And also, quick thing, if you know you only have 8 channels, I'd try to reduce the drum kit itself, because many drummers are used to having like 4 toms, but they don't really need them. They just never questioned it. So just try and like just see if you can play your parts with just 2 toms instead of 4, and you save 2 channels already. And for most situations, I'm going to be honest, for most situations, this is going to be enough. I've seen so many drummers set up insane kits and then using most of the stuff like once on the record. So just reduce the stuff you're using, which forces you also to, I think sometimes that results in better playing and better parts. It forces you to think fills through better, and like, I'd do that first. Then I would mic the 2 toms. I would probably end up with a rec tom and a floor tom. I would mic those. So you'd be at 6 mics.
Yep. Now you got 2 more. So this is where it gets tricky.
Yeah, exactly. I'd probably, it's totally about priority then and what you think is important. I'd probably skip a kick out and a snare bottom. You don't really need it. I'd probably skip hi-hats, except for if it's like a very quiet, but very detailed hi-hat part that you definitely need, where you're not getting enough detail through the overheads. That could be a case for a hi-hat mic, but most of the time there'll be enough hi-hat in the overheads. Yep. So I'd probably, because I always like these unique things and character things, I'd probably use the 2 channels for room mics, or some center of the kit mic, or a mono overhead, or a second pair of overheads. I don't know. It's just
more kit than anything.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think with a kick, snare, 2 toms, and a pair of overheads, you got the basics, and then the other 2 mics I would use to fill in whatever's missing or add character, depending on the room you have. If you're in a very, very great sounding room, it would be a shame to not record it, right? Yeah. If the room is boring, then you could maybe do a hi-hat mic or whatever, but depends. Absolutely. But I go for room and character first, I think.
Yeah, I think I agree. So little recap on that for listeners. Kick, snare, tom-tom, overheads. Like we've close mic'd all of our shell drums already. Now there's something close to each one of those drums. And then we've got an overheads, which is going to capture our cymbals and just kit in general. So now we've we've got those couple more channels, and it's just about choosing what to prioritize. I like to think of it from the song. Like that's what I've been trying to tell people to do these days anyways. It's like, is the hi-hat like just outrageously important for the groove? Then we should probably have a mic on it, you know? If there has to be a third tom, like that's just mandatory, then yeah, we're gonna, throw it up, mic that tom, and then you've got one channel left, and you can just decide what's important from there, kind of thing. So it's all about what's important to the song, and what needs to be there, and then just make that call. I really do like that you pointed out that if your room just doesn't sound great, then why would you have a room mic grabbing this garbage, right?
Yeah.
Like get it on something closer. It would be fantastic. Something I do see happen is that people will maybe have a mic on a tom because they're used to that tom being there, and then they don't even play it, and that's a bummer. So take off that tom, get it literally out of the room because it's just causing noise. You've used a channel on it. And like, even I would argue that a lot of songs could have the toms overdubbed. Like if you're going to overdub anything, toms are really easy because they eat up channels like crazy, especially if you want to have a bunch of them, and they don't get played very often. So, if they're like only like getting hit once in the whole song, or like once before each chorus or something like that, and they're just sitting there ringing through the rest of the recording, because toms do resonate while you're hitting all the other drums. They just create a lot of noise that I think they should be just pulled off and maybe just overdubbed. And
maybe,
that...
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that's a great argument for the 4-channel setup. This is kind of making me think that 4-channel is more possible than I believed, because you could do kick, snare, overhead, and then overdub your toms on top of that pretty easy. Yeah. And you could really pull off something pretty cool with 4 channels.
Absolutely agreed. And what I would even try to do, what I would suggest, is you could mic the toms, like you do kick, snare, overhead, then you mic the toms. You record, you don't really overdub them. I mean, you can do that if that works, but you can also just record samples of them in different velocities.
Right.
And then just look at your overhead tracks and just see where the tom hits are and just put samples there. Basically do it manually, like just trigger your toms from the overheads, or like put them manually there if it's just a couple of fills. And you won't even have to play those fills. You could just record samples and put them there.
Right.
So if you're not able to pull it off, like sometimes that can be really difficult to overdub drum stuff. So, but yeah, both is possible. But you wouldn't even have to play it. You could just probably record samples of your toms and put them where they are supposed to go.
Yeah, it's definitely an option. I'm going to steer us away from that because we're getting dangerously into a different topic of recording hacks.
Yes.
But so really the only takeaway you need to concern yourself with there is that we really made sure we close mic'd all of the drums that are actually being played. And okay, tough love on drummers here. If you have 3 toms and you don't have enough channels, don't talk yourself into just still playing that tom that's not mic'd. That's a garbage idea. You should just take the tom out. I'm mixing a song literally right now where the floor tom is not mic'd and the 2 rack toms are. And I'm like, yeah, this part sounds like shit because it's all on the rack tom or on the floor tom. That's not mic'd. Like, what were you thinking?
Yes. Hard agree.
Yeah, and I've seen that more than once. So drummers, if you can't mic it, get rid of it. That's my opinion.
Same with like, even worse, I think, with like weird effects symbols that don't have a close mic on them, and there's no way to really replace or trigger them. That's often the case. They have some symbol on the far right outside of what the overheads will cover, and there's no close mic, and then you get revision requests with like, bring that china up, and I'm like, I can't. There's no mic on it. Like, it's So
it's an impossible story. Yeah. And again, that's like, that like little weird splash that happens once in the song. Just overdub it. Yeah. It's fine. Make it sound awesome.
Exactly. Okay, cool. So I totally agree. You can do more with 4 channels than you might think. So 4 channels, kick, snare, overheads, or kick, snare, toms, and then overdub cymbals, or whatever. There's tons of options here still with 4 mics. Let's get to like technical engineering pitfalls. So let's say you've decided what mics you're going to use and what the drum kit's going to look like. What can go wrong now?
Okay, yeah. So we've said this before, but new skins are amazing, and the best thing you can do for a drum session. Please at least get that snare done. A fresh skin on a snare really just makes all the difference.
So much.
Yeah, definitely. Being able to tune it though, that's the counterpart of that, right? If you can't get a drum to sound good, it won't sound good no matter what your mixer does. So it has to sound good being hit. And that means the skin and the tuning combo and how it's played, of course, have to be happening.
Common question, by the way, that I get a lot. Yes, also replace the resonant skins because the resonant heads, because if they've been on the kit for a long while, you won't be able to tune them properly anymore. They will be like stretched in a weird way. They won't be like it's gonna be very hard to get them in tune, and they need to be in tune with the better head in order for the whole drum to come to life and to sound good and to get rid of like weird unmusical overtones and stuff like that. So, I mean, better heads is better than nothing, but still, if at all possible, do all of the heads, with the exception of the kick drum resonant head. I don't really care about that. That's just me, maybe, but I don't really care about it. It's in most of the time, it's so loose anyway, and like, like the kick drum skins in general. But better head also because of the attack. With the exception of the kick drum resonant head, I would change everything. Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, if you can, absolutely. I think there's no excuse to not have a fresh snare on each song because they're cheap. I mean, you can I think you can get through a day with a fresh snare head, like no problem. Actually, I mean, if you can change it every song, fuck yeah. But but it's okay if you don't. I've seen people play some. I mean, okay, I'm just gonna stop. Change that snare skin.
and pick the right ones. Also, like if you don't know what to buy, get some advice here, get some feedback. Maybe have a call with your mixer or like some person who knows what they're talking about, because you might pick the wrong stuff for your genre or for the sound you're going for. You might have read something and assumed it will be right for what you're trying to do, but it turned out to be the complete opposite. I've had that happen as well. So skin choice, you have to know that, and that's the last thing I say about skins here. You have to know that like 80% or so of your drum tone will come from the skin, or more even. Like more, the shell themselves, people always focus on what snare do you use, what toms do you use, which kit. The actual shells matter much less than the heads. Most of the sound of the drum sound comes from the stick hitting the head, the skin. And like even crappy kits can sound great with new skins tuned properly. And the most expensive kits will sound like shit with the wrong skins or old skins. So, or if they're not tuned right. So really make that a priority.
Drum skins are like the guitar cabinets of amps or of drums. Let's say. Then phase problems, I think, was probably actually like the second thing to like really pay attention. So for, again, as mixers here, the big things that we really want to see is that we've got a close mic on each drum, right? That's in play. And then the next thing is that our snare isn't screwed, because if those two things happen, we have a lot of power as experienced mixers. We can do a lot with those two things if they're met. So the biggest tip I have for that is just like measure off your overheads from like the snare or the center of kit. There's kind of varying spots, but we have episodes on drums. Go back and listen to them. But for now, let's just say snare, and make sure that distance to both overheads is the same. That's really going to do a lot, and that makes a huge difference. I hadn't really considered this before, but recently I got tracks from a guy, and his interface doesn't have a polarity button on the preamps, so he can't correct the phase until it's in post, and that's a whole nother thing to learn how to do, is like to render those changes in post, right? So it just means that I had to do it, but be aware of that, I think. But make sure, you measure your overheads. I think that's really important, and something that gets missed.
Yeah, agreed. And quick tip here, the center of your kit is usually not a straight line through the kick drum, as many people think. It's a line through the center of the snare and the center of the kick drum. So if you're doing a spaced pair overheads, for example, one will probably be somewhere over, like from drummer's perspective, somewhere on the left over the crash, or between the crash and hats, somewhere there. And the other one will probably be somewhere over the floor tom, or like the floor tom and ride, somewhere there. So it's like you want to make sure that the kick and snare, or at least the snare, is in the center of the image. And oftentimes that means like, you gotta. It looks a little different than you might think, probably. So but just check our other episodes on that. We even have like a picture of that in the show notes and like all that stuff. But just make sure, if you pan the overheads hard left and right, make sure the snare is in the center. Make sure you don't have weird comb filtering on the cymbals. Like It shouldn't sound like a
Yes.
cheap MP3. You should get clear highs, clear top end from the cymbals, no cancellation, and kick and snare should be as centered as possible.
That's a great tip. Yeah, when you get the solo overheads, and if you hear like the kick and it seems like it's coming out far left and the snare's coming out far right, that's a really, really hard thing to make sound good in a mix, because that's not how people hear drums.
Yep.
And then I think like last thing for technical stuff is just watch out for like weird rattling and stuff like that. Just people aren't used to like caring about that because they're just in like their jam spaces where everything rattles, but in a recording we care, right? So maybe something's loose on one of your cymbal stands and it's just vibrating away, or like your tom leg is touching another cymbal stand and they're like scraping against each other when it's played or something, stuff like that.
Yeah.
The door vibrates or something, like weird things happen, so just keep an eye out for them.
Squeaking chairs, squeaking pedals. Sometimes the kick pedal can make weird noises sometimes,
or hi-hat.
Hi-hats as well. Like radiators next to the kit that like do weird sounds, and I've had all these things happen. So just check your room for stuff like that and your gear as well.
Yeah, definitely.
One more little pet peeve here, real quick, and that is the dampening. It goes along with the tuning, but I just need to say it because for whatever reason, many people seem to think that overtones or sustain on drums is generally a bad thing. And that's not true. Like I've gotten so many over-dampened, overly dead drums, which are so hard to mix because they won't cut through. Much of the sustain of a snare drum, for example, is gonna get lost in the mix anyways. So it's not gonna be nearly as ringy as you think it is once it's mixed. So you want to make your drums like loud and proud and like have some overtones, have some tone to it. I don't know where that comes from. Maybe people are afraid of like. They don't want to end up with St. Anger snare or whatever, but I don't know where that comes from. But it's just I've had that so often that people go too dead a lot.
Yeah,
and
I
don't
agree.
Like that. Yeah.
I think it's when you're like focused listening, you're kind of prone to honing in on nodes, right? And like focused sounds, and the ring of a drum is the thing that stands out the most. So we automatically think we need to attack it.
Yeah.
But it's the note. It's an important part of that sound for sure.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Don't kill all of that. Everything else is up to taste. So
unless it's meant to be the deadest thing ever.
Of course, if you want to have
happens.
like the 70s, whatever, you can throw a towel over your snare and it could work. So
absolutely.
It's up to you, but just be intentional. Cool. All right, then performance-related pitfalls with drums. So the technical part is right. What can you do right or wrong when it comes to actually playing the drums? Because even more than in the skins, the sound is in your hands, actually, in the drummer's hands.
So something I've noticed since we started this podcast is that some people have taken to the DIY recording thing and done totally fine, and some people have had a little bit of a rougher learning curve. And the people that seem to do well have had studio experience with a professional before. So they kind of know, they have a better idea of what this, again, good enough level is. As far as their performances and as well as what editing can accomplish. And so that's, if you don't have any studio experience, that's just going to be a little bit, you're going to have to work a little extra hard to figure that out. Or we've recommended before, try and do a song with an engineer or producer just to get that experience, like treat it as a learning experience more than anything. But another thing that you can do is like, record your drums, for example, and then hire an editor and send it to them and get the feedback, right? And that editor is going to be able to tell you like, oh, I can't edit these, and like, okay, well that's valuable feedback.
Yeah.
Like we have to do a lot better then, right? Like that'll be a worthwhile lesson.
Absolutely.
And I mean, some editors are also really good at recording drums, so you might get some tips on like how you did engineering them as well, right? Which is great if that happens. But making sure they're played to that good enough level is obviously just hugely important.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I just got distracted because your door opened itself in the background. Like,
yeah, we got ghosts. No, it's just like a weird thing where a door opens or a door gets closed outside or like upstairs somewhere, and this door opens. It's like an air pressure thing. It's weird.
All right. I just thought the cat came in or whatever. So
often that's also the case. Yeah. Animals enter in the studio.
Okay, cool. But I totally agree. Many people just don't know what that good enough is again, and but getting that feedback can be very, very valuable, or is almost always valuable. So do it with one song, just maybe, and then you can take what you learn to the and apply it to the other songs.
Definitely.
So yeah, that's about like playing in time.
Kind of.
Kind of, yeah, exactly. Not
yeah,
only.
I think mostly it's about
mostly.
playing in time. We're gonna hit that point, so keep going.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so whatever you do, edit your drum performance or have it edited before moving on to a new instrument. That's also, when we talk about editing, we need to mention that again. That's also a really common mistake where people would do all the drums and then do all the guitars right away, or the bass or whatever. If you're smart, you're doing guitars and then the bass. But
yes. Yeah, don't skip that step.
Yeah.
It's like it just still happens all the time, and it's so important.
Yeah. You just agreed to my way of doing it. Did you realize that? I just said if you're smart, do the guitars first and then the bass. And
I
said,
did not.
Yes.
No, I did not. I was zoned out. Okay, screw that.
It happened. Malcolm agreed with me finally.
Actually, I got an Evertune now, so whatever, either or.
No, it doesn't matter if you do bass or guitars first. We have our opinions here, and if you want to go listen to that, you listen to another episode. We've been talking about that, but whatever you do first, make sure you do it to edited drums. That's so important, because if you don't, you're gonna end up having to edit everything else even more, because you're gonna play to those not in time drums, and it's gonna be a mess. So, edit first, then move on. So, timing is one thing that can go wrong, and getting feedback, having it professionally edited, is one way to solve this. And obviously, like practicing and playing well. But also, even if you nail the timing, there's a couple of things that still can go wrong. And for example, there could be off hits, like where the drummer misses a hit entirely, or hits a drum off center and it sounds really different. Or that's basically the main things that can happen. Or like you hit the rim accidentally instead of the head, stuff like that. Just listen for those things and try to correct those, either with a sample or by just punching it again.
Yeah. I would say ideally it's something that gets solved in the performance part. So a lot of drummers, when they're getting started out into recording, are very focused on timing, because you kind of grow up like terrified of the metronome, and then eventually you face it and get good at it. So you're really focused on, am I playing in time? And that is so important and fantastic, obviously. But making sure that you're hitting the drum and that it sounds like the same drum every single time you hit it is the thing that separates session drummers from the rest. Is like their ability to be consistent in both tone and dynamics. And that is like really like the magic sauce of an unbelievable drum performance, is like how they hit that is so musical.
Agreed. 100% agreed. There's this phenomenon, you can try that yourself, and you should actually, I think, just to see that it's true. If you like set up a drum kit and tune it properly and mic it and like everything so that it sounds great when you play it or when the person in the room plays it, and leave everything, like record one person with that drum kit, leave everything as it is, get another person in and have them play on the same kit and record it and then compare. You will have two completely different sounding results, just because everyone plays so differently. And a really, really good drummer can make a shitty drum kit sound usable sometimes, or at least like not like it shouldn't be a shitty drum kit, but a really good drummer on a crappy kit is better than a bad drummer on a good kit. And so much so. And like they just know how to work with a kit, how to respond to how it sounds, how to hit it that it sounds great. That's why, for example, when sample libraries are being made, it's not that the engineer or just some random person hits the shells for like tracking samples. They get good drummers in the room to do that. And you think, okay, you just have to hit the snare or hit the tom or whatever. But it's not as simple as that. Like a good drummer will hit it differently. And they get great drummers into the room to hit a snare 1,000 times for a sample library, just because they know it's going to sound better if that person does it. Yeah,
absolutely. So that is so hugely important. It's not just timing that makes a good drum performance. It's also just like this amazing accuracy. And again, that's in tone. So tone being how you hit it and exactly where you hit the drum is kind of like the biggest decider. I think it's like velocity plus aim. But the dynamics is the other thing, because like some people will hit a snare once and it's quiet, and then the next time they hit it, it's twice as loud, and that's not intentional, and that's like really, really hard to mix. Again, we're coming at this like, if you want us to turn this into a mix that really hits that good enough level, these are the things we need. And,
Yes.
This will do so much.
Totally. Like the consistency is key. And also, I think like one of the biggest things for me, and I preach that all the time, is the cymbal to shell balance. So when a person, like a really good drummer, will control the cymbals as much as needed, like crashes can be have to be explosive, of course, sometimes, but most of the time, hi-hats, for example, or ride cymbals need to be controlled throughout the part, but the snare and the kick need to be hit hard nonetheless. So they have a very heavy left hand sometimes and a very controlled right hand. And many hobby drummers or like beginners do the opposite. They will hit the crap out of the cymbals with the right hand and like barely hit the snare. So that's that
Right.
giveaway for some like beginner drummers. And that just doesn't sound good and introduces all sorts of problems also in post with bleed
Right.
and everything. So the consistency, cymbal to shell balance, the angle, the fact that you have to hit it a certain spot on the drum skin for it to sound the best. Some people bounce off the snare, others like dig into it, that will sound completely different. Like all these things, just pay attention to what you do, and then if it leads to results that you don't like, just practice and maybe wait with the recording until you got that right. You know, it's just so important.
Definitely. Yeah, I entirely agree. Something that came to mind while you were saying that is the idea of like failing fast, and that is just another way of saying do one song at a time and learn from each one. I love when like these bands that have been recording themselves ask me about their tracks, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can just give you some feedback, and the next one will be like make my life even easier. Like hell yeah, I'm gonna do that. That's a good use of my time, giving you feedback on what you did.
Oh yeah.
So that in alternative, say the band had recorded the whole demo, or I mean a whole album of 10 songs before they asked for feedback, then whatever they screwed up on the song one is going to be there for all the songs, and that's a bummer. So the fail fast mentality is like the best attitude you can have in DIY recording.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And
absolutely.
and keep in mind that means that you have to be okay with the first song not being as good as the last song on a technical standpoint. I mean, maybe songwriting, that's up to you guys.
Yeah, totally agreed. Keep the feedback loop short, always.
Yeah, definitely.
I just wanted to add that I did a video actually about the consistency and also the shell and cymbal balance in the Self-Recording Band Academy, our course on DIY recording. There's a video where, and I'm not a good drummer by all means. Like I can play drums a bit, but I don't consider myself a great drummer. Not at all. But I did that experiment myself. I got behind the drum kit and I set up an SM58 in the middle of the room, like the first thing I could grab. I just put it there on a stand a couple of feet away from the kit, and I just played two different ways. I tried to play uncontrolled, like with loud cymbals and a pretty weak snare, and then I tried to really focus on that balance. I tried to hit the snare consistently and the kick consistently and the toms, and I tried to control the cymbals. And I compared the results, and I made a whole lesson in the course about that. And I was pretty surprised about the difference. And I was also surprised how balanced a kit can sound with a single mic in front of it on a stand if the playing is okay, at least. Like it sounded like a drum kit. That didn't sound too bad with just a 58 a couple of feet away. I was surprised myself, but it really worked.
Cool.
So
that's awesome.
I just wanted to say that I did the experiment myself, and it's crazy the difference it makes. Also makes me think how much more usable room mics and overhead mics are if you pay attention to that. So
right. Yeah. Definitely.
Cool. Another thing that I found, I don't know, and that's the thing I want to ask you, Malcolm, if you have made that experience as well. Sometimes when people record large chunks and if they don't do like individual parts, but record half a song or the whole song or whatever, sometimes they start with a lot of energy and they hit the snare hard and the kick hard and everything sounds great, but then they kind of forget about it and focus on other things, or their mind goes somewhere else. And then you notice, and even I see it sometimes visually, you see the snare gets quieter throughout a part and loses all the energy. They somehow forget that they have to hit it hard. So also that's also part of dynamics and consistency for me. And I want to always make sure that the dynamics are intentional and not just because you lost the energy over time.
Yeah. Again, when you're recording yourself, you have this advantage that you can look at the waveform and literally just see how consistent you are. A good drummer looks pretty symmetrical on across a waveform. So there's your tip. It's pretty visually accurate what's going on there.
Yeah, so
that's a great suggestion, Benny.
So you have the same. You've made the same experience, like with
definitely. Drummers. I didn't really think about that in the DIY thing because when I'm not doing DIY and I'm actually recording somebody playing drums, that's something I'm told that that's why I like punching. Like maybe we punch the second half of the song so you can hit that full energy kind of thing. It's the same with vocals. I find vocal full takes with vocalists don't generally work out because of that same thing. Like energy is just not sustainable throughout an entire song. Always. Sometimes it can be. But so different topic, but definitely great advice. Don't be afraid to punch part way through. If you're recording yourself, like literally just you in the room, it's kind of tricky to do punch-ins because it's just a lot of work to run transport at the same time. So if you can't do it, just really focus on being consistent.
Yeah. And have someone else in the room, I think, who focuses as well, because you might not notice if you're just on your own. So it's a thing that also happens when people get distracted or when people have to focus very much on one thing. That happens also a lot with, like, for example, metal drummers. When there is a part that's supposed to sound very big, like a breakdown, I don't know, like a heavy halftime part, whatever, and they are playing a kind of complicated kick drum pattern, for example. They are focusing on their feet so much that they completely forget how to correctly hit the snare. And like you have this part that's supposed to sound huge, and there has to be this big snare in that part, but they just barely hit it because they're all focused on their feet. And if no one else is in the room who notices that, like, this could just go unnoticed. And
right.
And sometimes the part before that might sound bigger than the actual big part because of that, because you just completely forgot that the snare is also important in that part, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely good advice. I think the last thing I want to leave people with, and this is not just for drums, but when you hit the last note of a song and it's like this note that has to fade out for however long, hold it for much longer than you think you need to. I don't know why, but DIY bands always get lazy and just stop the note eventually, or like stand up and drop their drumsticks. And it's like, that's not nearly enough for me to like make a smooth fade out on your song. So like cymbal decay, like hit your last stuff, hold your breath, and just sit there for way too long.
Yes, totally. Like I have a really fun story, little quick story to tell here. I once recorded drums in the middle of a house, basically an open space in the middle of the house where the stairs go up.
Okay.
Yeah, and it sounded great, so we put the drum kit there. We recorded it, and like it was some part that was pretty complicated, and we were trying this part for hours. I don't know, like we did 78 takes of this part. I don't know, and like then at some point, like after hours of trying to nail that take, he eventually nailed it, and it was awesome. And there was the last cymbal hit, and it was supposed to be the last hit of the song, and like the decay and everything. And he hit the cymbals. And his dad was standing in the same room watching him play. And like 2 seconds after he hit the last cymbal, his dad goes, "Yeah!" Because he was so happy that he finally nailed it. And we all just slowly turned our heads at him and then look at him and, "Are you fucking serious?"
You just ruined it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in this case, you could also punch in the last cymbal and like save it. But it was this moment we were all like, yes! And then he completely ruined it by screaming into the sustain.
Amazing.
And he was very, very sorry for that afterwards. Like he didn't realize until we told him, and then he was like, "Oh, damn, sorry."
Yeah.
So we felt bad for him.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things when you're sitting in the chair or on the drum throne or whatever. It feels like it's already been a long time. So you're like, this must be enough. But it rarely is enough. I don't know. It's like another 10 seconds, please.
Yes, for sure. That actually, I've never really thought about that we should put that in an episode, but it's so true. It's almost every DIY record almost that some guitar sustain or some cymbals or whatever is just not long enough. It's almost every time.
I would say guitarists, you're the most guilty of this.
Yeah.
You're just holding some freaking sustained note and then you just get lazy. And it's like,
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like the best part is when they like hit the chord again or like do some weird noise in the end instead of just letting it.
Yeah, at least play Sweet Child of Mine or something.
Yeah.
Cranky.
All right. Yeah, good one. So yeah, let it fade out until you don't hear anything anymore.
Yeah. So there's a lot in there, guys. We realize that, but like the big takeaway for me is that the close mics that are being played all have their close mic on them. Like, I mean, the shells that are all being played. Like that's so huge. And then if you get that and a pair of cymbals and then you play it so damn well, we can make that sound awesome.
Yes. Agreed.
All right.
Cool.
And next episode's going to be on guitars and bass and vocals, keys, the rest probably.
Yes, exactly. And like drums are the most complicated thing to record always.
Yes.
And so we start with that. And a lot of what's true for the bass will be true for the guitar as well. So we will combine that in the next episode and get through that.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to leave you with one more thing here. I have a free thing for you, actually, a free gift, which is called the Essential Gear Guide or Essential DIY Recording Gear Guide. So if you're talking about minimum requirements and you don't even have your interface yet, or you don't know which microphones to use, or like stuff like that, I've made a PDF guide. It's called the Essential Gear Guide, and you get it if you go to the selfrecordingband.com/gear guide. I'm updating it regularly. The last update's been a couple of months, I think, but it's still very valuable and true. I'm going to update it soon again. And it's just a list of things you need if you want to record. It's like what the name says. So minimum requirements, it's all in there. It helps you not waste money, make good decisions, buy what you really need, avoid what you don't need, and get a good starting point so you can implement all of what we taught you today. The selfrecordingband.com/gear guide.
We did miss one thing.
Okay, now I'm curious.
And it's like, what about microphones? Like, what's the good enough for gear? And I don't know if you're going to have the same opinion, but I personally think if you could just buy like any starter pack, like the Shure starter pack drum miking kit, comes in like a little plastic case. I don't like any of those mics, but they're good enough.
I agree, but I still always advise against buying these kits because I personally think picking and choosing individual mics is always better than those like drum packs. But like if you're on a budget, of course, these at least they can serve as triggers. So
yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's
that's
like
why
that.
You gotta get close mics.
So yeah, I'd rather deal with maybe you get a pair of decent overhead mics like the Rode or like in the $200-$300 euro category, like you could get usable small diaphragm condenser mics.
And there's like the best reason to not do the drum set mic starter pack thing is that if you do it mic by mic, you're going to end up with an SM57, which is going to be so helpful on everything else. You know, that kind of stuff where you get what's going to actually, like you save money by not going the cheapest route kind of thing. But you don't even need to listen to us talk about this because it's going to be in that PDF that Benny just recommended.
Exactly, but I absolutely agree. The ability to use these mics on other things is the main reason, actually, or one of the main reasons why I advise against these kits. Because if you think about it real quick, if you buy an SM57, and you can record everything with an SM57, so if you only buy like 10 57s, you're good. You know, like, but like, if you're gonna end up with a 57, you buy something like an SM7 or a Procaster, like a large diaphragm dynamic mic for the vocals. You can also use that as a kick mic or on a tom, on a floor tom or whatever. If you buy one good large diaphragm condenser, you can use it as a room mic or on acoustic guitars as a vocal mic, whatever. If you get a pair of small diaphragm condensers, those can record anything. And like these are mics that work on everything. So maybe a 57, a large diaphragm condenser, 2 small diaphragm, and then another 57 or whatever, and you're good to go for almost everything. So but download that guide. It's all in there. And if you already have one of these cheap mic sets, it can be good enough if you have decent overheads, I'd say.
Yeah, the overheads are the trickiest thing to get past, but really be careful about your placement. And again, how you play is going to make a huge impact on those overheads, like that shell to cymbal ratio that Benny was talking about earlier. Control that yourself.
One more sentence, because I'd say the minimum requirement, I just thought about it, the minimum requirement for a mic, close mic on drums, is it has to be able to take the level, basically. So any dynamic mic probably will do the job, some better than others, but that's basically my only minimum requirement. I don't want to have distorted transients. I want to have a clear transient, and that's basically it. Right. So just grab a mic that can take the level and a pair of decent overheads, and you're good.
Yeah, right on.
Awesome.
Okay, great episode.
See you next week. Bye. Thank you for listening.
Bye.